Winter sunlight made the closing canine facility look peaceful, even as its final 3 days began to run out. 5 aging working dogs were loaded into an old transport van, each carrying a different unfinished bond. Former Navy SEAL Gideon Knox was meant to deliver them safely, sign the papers, and keep moving. 4 dogs had someone waiting, or at least a place prepared to receive them. But Atlas, an 11-year-old German shepherd, had only the name of a former handler who refused to see him. Their last journey would reveal that bringing a dog home is sometimes less difficult than allowing others to help it stay there. Tell us where you are watching from and what this story leaves with you. And please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep creating meaningful stories. Morning reached North Star Working Dog Haven without warmth. The sun had cleared the pines east of Ironwood, but its light was thin and pale, spreading across the snow without softening it. Frost shone along the rooflines of the kennel buildings. From the road, the place looked orderly enough to survive another winter. Low cedar structures, fenced exercise yards, a weathered sign painted with a white compass star. Only the silence gave it away. A working kennel was never truly quiet. Even old dogs shifted, barked at engines, rattled bowls, or answered one another from opposite ends of the yard. At North Star, the sounds came separately now. One collar moving behind a door, a single low bark, the scrape of a shovel against frozen concrete. The building no longer sounded like a place beginning its day. It sounded like a place counting what remained. Gideon Thayer Knox turned his dark green transport van into the drive at 7:16 a.m. He noted the time in the blue cloth-bound notebook resting beside the gear shift, then closed it without comment. At 58, Gideon had the broad shoulders of a man who had once been trained to carry more than his share and had never quite stopped. His body was solid rather than athletic now, heavier through the chest, with a slight unevenness in his gait from an old injury at the left hip. Wind had reddened his long face beneath the cheekbones. A narrow nose, broken years ago and never set perfectly straight, gave him a severe profile that softened only when he looked at animals. His ash-brown hair, silver at the temples and longer than military regulations would ever have allowed, had been flattened by a green wool cap. A heavy mustache joined the trimmed beard around his chin, while his cheeks remained mostly clean. He wore a tobacco-brown canvas coat over a blue-gray sweater, charcoal work pants, and weathered boots whose leather had been polished only where snow had worn against them. Nothing on him identified his former service. No unit patch, no flag, no old insignia hidden on the inside of his coat. The van did not advertise that history either. Its paint had faded around the wheel wells, and one rear door bore a shallow dent from a loading dock in Ohio. Inside, however, Gideon had built the vehicle with the care of someone who believed preparation should be invisible. 5 separate travel compartments lined the rear cabin. Each had a non-slip floor, removable bedding, temperature sensors, water bowls fixed to the walls, and a camera linked to a monitor above the dashboard. An auxiliary heater hummed beneath the floor. He climbed down and stood for a moment, listening to the engine settle. The main kennel door opened before he reached it. Lorna Mae Bellamy came out carrying 3 folders against her chest and 2 more under one arm. She was 63, sturdy through the shoulders, wrapped in a plum-colored parka over a cream turtleneck. Her silver-gray hair had been cut to her chin and pinned away from one eye with a plain metal clip. Square brown glasses rested low on her nose. The ring of keys at her hip was too large for a place that would soon have no doors left to open. "You're early," she said. "I'm on time. That is what early people say to the rest of us." She held out the folders. Gideon did not take them immediately. "All 5 cleared?" 4 cleared for their first destinations, 1 cleared to travel. "That wasn't my question." "No," Lorna said. "It was the question you hoped had a different answer." He took the folders. Inside the building, heat still moved through the pipes, but it came with a faint metallic smell. Yellow inspection tags hung from 2 utility panels near the office. One had been signed the day before, another bore a red line beneath the words "Operation Prohibited after Friday, 6 p.m." The closure had not begun yesterday. North Star had lost its largest donor 6 weeks earlier. Staff hours had been reduced, food contracts had been renegotiated, 2 younger dogs had already moved to partner organizations in Iowa, another had gone home with a former handler in Michigan. Then an inspection found the aging furnace could no longer be trusted through the coldest part of the season. The property was already pledged to creditors. By Friday evening, the kennel wing had to be empty. 3 days. Not 3 days to save North Star. 3 days to finish leaving it. A woman in navy waterproof trousers knelt beside a black Labrador near the examination table. Dr. Meredith Sloan moved with the quick restraint of someone who did not waste an animal's patience. Her dark hair, threaded with silver at the part, had been tied low at her neck. A rust-colored stethoscope looped over one shoulder. "This is Morrow," she said without looking up. 12. His morning joint medication goes with breakfast, not before. He stiffens after 90 minutes, so your first stop comes earlier than your usual schedule. Gideon crouched far enough away not to crowd the dog. Morrow's muzzle had gone nearly white, though the rest of his coat remained glossy black. Meredith moved to the next enclosure. Nix, a lean Belgian Malinois female, stood facing the kennel door instead of the people. Her ears remained high, her body still. "She needs a visible exit," Meredith said. "If both sides of the transport compartment look closed, she circles. Don't mistake that for aggression." "I don't. I know. I'm saying it anyway." Sable, an elderly German shepherd female with faded sable fur, watched hand movements more closely than voices. Bracken, an 11-year-old bloodhound with a heavy russet coat and patient eyes, had a frayed length of old tow rope lying beneath one paw. Then Gideon saw Atlas. The German shepherd stood apart in the last kennel. He was large, even with age settling into his hindquarters. Gold-black fur covered his body, the dark saddle interrupted near the right shoulder by a wedge of honey-colored hair. His muzzle had silvered heavily around the chin. The right ear carried a small backward fold at the tip, while the left stood tall and slightly outward. Atlas was not looking at Gideon. He was watching Tessa Rowland. The veterinary technician stood at the sink, filling labeled water containers. She was compact, freckled, red-brown hair curling beneath a brick-colored beanie. A mustard sweatshirt showed under her green work vest. Yellow-handled medical shears were clipped to one pocket. Tessa's movements were quick, but Atlas tracked each one. When she bent to lift a crate of supplies, he shifted closer to the gate. Not threatening, bracing. "Atlas does that when someone hurts," Tessa said, still facing the sink, "or when he thinks they might." "My hip isn't his concern," Gideon replied. "I was talking about my back." She straightened carefully, and Atlas relaxed by half an inch. Meredith handed Gideon the final medical sheet. "He's physically stable, some arthritis, manageable. His problem is continuity." "Meaning?" "He attaches to routines and specific people. Rotating staff makes him stop eating. He sleeps near doors. If someone he knows is distressed, he stands between that person and the exit." Lorna placed the last folder on the examination table. It was thinner than the others. Gideon opened it. The destination line was blank. He read the page again, then turned it over as though an address might have been printed on the back. There was only one name: Jonah Elias Creel, former handler. Clearwater Ridge Rehabilitation Center, Minnesota. Direct reunion declined. Gideon closed the folder. "You put an unresolved dog on a 3-day route. We put a cleared dog on a legal transport while Meredith finishes the foster placement. That placement is not confirmed, no. And the handler won't see him, no. And every temporary facility you called has declined." Lorna removed her glasses. Without them, the tiredness around her eyes became harder to miss. "They didn't decline because Atlas is dangerous," she said. "They declined because none of them can promise the same person will feed him for more than 2 days in a row. That distinction won't matter to him when I reach the end of the route." "No," Lorna said, "it won't."
For several seconds, the only sound was Bracken shifting the old rope beneath his paw. Gideon felt anger arrive in the form it usually took with him, not heat, but order. A list of failures, missing approval, incomplete destination.
Unacceptable dependency, a vehicle becoming responsible for a decision it had not made. You're putting the unfinished part on my truck. Lorna met his gaze. Yes. The answer stopped him more effectively than an excuse would have. She continued, quieter. If we wait until the unfinished part becomes finished, Atlas stays here Friday night. The heat will be off. The insurance will be gone. The staff will no longer be authorized to enter the kennel wing. Gideon looked toward Atlas. The dog had turned from Tessa and was watching him now. Not pleading, not frightened. Measuring. Lorna folded her glasses and held them in one hand. I would rather send him toward an uncertain answer with people who know what uncertainty costs than leave him behind because the paperwork looks cleaner that way. Gideon disliked the sentence because it made sense. Loading began just after 8. Morrow went first.
Tessa gave a low hand signal, and the Labrador climbed the ramp with the slow dignity of an animal who had performed harder tasks for people less patient than these. Nix stopped at the entrance of her compartment. Gideon opened the opposite access panel so daylight passed through the enclosure. She examined the visible path, then stepped inside without being touched. Sable did not respond when Tessa called her name. Tessa moved into her field of vision and raised 2 fingers. Sable watched, turned once toward the empty kennel corridor, then followed the gesture up the ramp. Bracken carried the length of tow rope himself. When Gideon reached for it, the bloodhound tightened his jaw. Not a growl, only a decision. Let him keep it, Tessa said. He's slept with that thing since before I worked here. It's filthy. So is half the history people insist on carrying. Gideon secured the rope away from Bracken's feet and closed the compartment. Atlas remained in the yard. No one called him.
Snow reflected sharply around his legs. His golden coat seemed warmer against the white, though the air had dropped below 10 degrees. Tessa stood near the kennel door. Lorna waited beside the ramp. Meredith checked her watch, but did not hurry anyone. Gideon walked through the rear cabin, testing each latch, once, then again. Atlas watched. Gideon opened the final compartment. He checked the bedding, the water fixture, the camera angle, and the temperature sensor. Then he stepped out of the van and moved away from the ramp. He did not pat his leg. He did not use Atlas's name. He waited. A minute passed. Tessa's eyes shifted toward him, but she said nothing. Atlas approached the ramp, stopped at its base, and looked inside. Then he looked back toward the kennel building, where the open doorway framed a corridor already stripped of spare blankets, bowls, and name cards. The dog climbed into the van, not because he had been ordered, because every other place had begun to disappear. Lorna closed the kennel door after the final supply box was loaded. The remaining staff stood near the building in winter coats and work gloves. No one formed a line. No one gave a speech. One man lowered his head when the engine started. Another woman raised her hand, then let it fall before the gesture became a wave. Lorna turned the key in the lock. The wooden North Star attached to her keyring tapped once against the metal plate. Tessa climbed into the passenger seat. Gideon entered the driver's side and placed the folders between them. On the monitor above the dashboard, 5 separate images glowed. Morrow lowered himself carefully onto his blanket. Nix remained seated where she could see the narrow line of light around the access panel. Sable turned twice before lying down. Bracken rested his muzzle across the frayed rope. Atlas stood. His body faced forward, but his eyes remained on the rear doors. Gideon shifted the van into gear. North Star moved slowly past the windshield, the empty exercise yard, the cedar buildings, the sign beside the road. Sunlight flashed across the snow so brightly it erased detail for a moment. Then the trees closed behind them. Tessa opened the route binder. First scheduled stop in just under 80 minutes. Gideon nodded. He checked the road, the mirrors, and finally the monitor again.
4 dogs had settled. Atlas had not. The German shepherd remained upright, listening to whatever could no longer be heard behind them. Gideon had begun the morning believing he was moving 5 animals between approved locations. Now one compartment had no destination, and none of the 5 carried only a medical file. Each dog belonged to a relationship that had ended badly, incompletely, or without permission. The van was not carrying them away from a closing kennel, it was carrying 5 unfinished goodbyes, and one of them had nowhere yet to arrive. The road west from Ironwood narrowed beneath a white sky. For the first 40 miles, Gideon drove through long corridors of spruce and birch where snow had gathered in the branches until each tree seemed burdened by its own silence. The van's heater worked steadily. The tires held well. No warning lights appeared on the dashboard. Those were the kinds of facts Gideon trusted. The monitor above the windshield showed 5 compartments in grainy color. Morrow lay with his chin on his front paws, breathing evenly. Nix remained upright, angled toward the narrow window in her door. Sable slept with one ear tilted toward the vibration of the road. Bracken's rope shifted whenever the van turned. Atlas stood for the first 20 minutes. Then he sat. Only after Gideon pulled into a plowed turnout and Tessa walked through the rear cabin, speaking each dog's name in the same calm voice, did Atlas finally lower himself to the bedding.
"You didn't tell me that was part of the schedule," Gideon said when Tessa returned to the passenger seat. "It isn't." "You do it every stop?" "Most of them." "Why?" "So they know the door's opening doesn't always mean someone disappears." Gideon looked back at the road. Tessa did not add anything. She had already learned that silence worked differently with Gideon than with most people. He did not use it to invite confidence. He used it to give words time to prove whether they were necessary. Near Ashland, the trees thinned and Lake Superior appeared beyond the passenger window, steel blue beneath the pale morning. Ice had formed in broken shelves along the shoreline. Farther out, open water moved under a low veil of mist. The route turned north toward Bayfield, then left the main highway for a county road lined with dormant orchards. Apple trees looked smaller in winter. Without leaves or fruit, their crooked limbs revealed every old cut, every place where weather had broken and healing had grown around it. Snow filled the furrows between the rows. Wooden ladders leaned beneath the eaves of long storage sheds. A faded sign marked the entrance to Dane Orchard, though the lower half had been buried by a plow ridge. Wesley Dane waited beside the apple barn. He was thinner than Gideon expected. At 66, Wesley had a narrow frame, a slight bend through the upper back, and the large hands of a man who had spent decades repairing fences, pruning trees, and lifting boxes without asking whether his joints approved. White hair showed beneath a waxed canvas cap. A short beard covered his chin, but his upper lip was clean. He wore dark denim overalls beneath a blue-gray wool coat. In his right hand, he held a silver whistle. He did not wave when the van stopped. Gideon parked on the cleared gravel near the barn and left the engine running to maintain heat. Tessa checked Morrow's compartment while Gideon walked the property. The house stood one level above the orchard road, with a shallow wooden porch and a recently added handrail. The fenced yard extended from the back door to the barn. Most of it had been cleared, though a silver patch of ice remained beneath the outdoor faucet. A wooden ramp led from the porch to the yard. Gideon crouched beside it. The angle was wrong. Wesley approached, but stayed several feet away. The whistle remained in his hand. "I followed the measurements they sent," he said. "You measured the rise?" "Twice." "The slope is still too steep for a 12-year-old dog with stiff hips." Wesley looked at the ramp rather than at Gideon. "I can rebuild it." "You'll have to." "I said I can." There was no defensiveness in the reply, only disappointment directed inward. Gideon stood. Behind them, Tessa opened the rear access door and lowered the portable ramp from the van. Morrow appeared at the opening.
For a moment, Wesley forgot to breathe. The old Labrador had once been almost entirely black. Age had silvered his muzzle and eyebrows, giving his face the grave dignity of an elderly judge. He looked down at the snow, then at Tessa, waiting. Tessa gave a low hand signal. Morrow stepped onto the ramp. His front paws reached the ground easily. His hind legs followed more slowly, and when his weight shifted off the incline, his left hip stiffened. He stood with his legs braced apart, gathering himself. Wesley took one step forward, then he stopped. He did not call Morrow's name. He did not crouch with open arms. He turned his body slightly sideways and lowered one shoulder, making himself smaller without pretending not to be there. Morrow lifted his head. His nose moved. The orchard held layers of scent beneath the cold. Old apples in storage bins, split cedar, engine oil, frozen earth, wool, and the faint sweetness of fruit pressed into wooden boards over decades.
Morrow looked at Wesley but did not approach. Instead, he began walking toward the barn. Wesley's hand tightened around the whistle. Gideon watched the motion. The silver tube rose 2 inches before Wesley caught himself and let it fall again. Morrow passed a stack of empty crates, paused beside the fence post, then entered through the open barn door. His paws clicked against the concrete floor. Wesley followed at a distance. Inside, the barn smelled warmer than the yard. Sunlight entered through high, dusty windows, laying pale rectangles across the floor. One wall held pruning tools, harnesses, and coils of rope. A row of wooden bins stood empty beneath a loft. At the far end, Wesley opened a narrow storage cabinet. An old canvas coat hung inside. The sleeves were polished at the elbows. Dark stains marked one pocket. Beneath it sat a wooden toolbox whose surface had absorbed years of linseed oil, leather, and cold metal. Morrow stopped. His nose lifted. He did not rush. Recognition came into him slowly, not as excitement but as concentration. He crossed the last few feet and stood before the open cabinet, breathing in the air around the coat. Wesley looked down at the whistle in his hand. "I used to call him in with this," he said. 2 short notes. Tessa stayed near the door. "He remembers other things, too." Wesley raised the whistle toward his mouth. Morrow turned his head. The dog's eyes rested on him. Wesley's hand began to shake. He lowered the whistle. "No," he said, though no one had told him not to use it. "Not for this." He placed the whistle on the cabinet shelf. Then he sat on an overturned apple crate. Morrow remained where he was for several seconds. He sniffed the coat again, moved around the toolbox, and walked a slow half-circle through the barn. When he finally approached Wesley, there was no dramatic burst of recognition. Morrow simply stopped beside him. Wesley kept both hands on his knees. The Labrador leaned his shoulder against Wesley's shin. The contact was so ordinary it stripped the moment of performance. No command, no reward, no audience that mattered to the dog. Wesley closed his eyes. His right hand came down carefully and rested against Morrow's neck. "I'm late," he whispered. Morrow shifted his weight more firmly against him. Gideon looked away. Outside, wind loosened powder from the barn roof. It fell in a bright curtain past the doorway, briefly filling the sunlight with thousands of white fragments. Tessa stepped beside Gideon. "You all right?" she asked quietly. "I'm working." That wasn't the question. It was the answer. She let him keep it. The emotional part of the reunion lasted less than 5 minutes. The practical part took nearly 2 hours. Gideon walked Wesley through every area Morrow would use. The indoor water bowl had been placed down 3 steps in a utility room. The path from the back door to the fenced yard crossed the icy patch beneath the faucet. A narrow runner rug near the kitchen curled upward at one corner. Wesley listened without argument. When Gideon told him the porch ramp had to be rebuilt, Wesley brought out a circular saw, a level, and a stack of lumber already cut for repairs. Gideon removed his canvas coat and worked in the blue-gray sweater beneath it. Together, they shortened the rise, extended the base, and added cross strips for traction. Tessa spread rubber mats across the kitchen floor and moved the water bowl upstairs. She taped the curled rug flat, then checked Morrow's gums and range of motion after the drive. Wesley's neighbor, Harold Vick, arrived in a red pickup shortly before noon. He was a broad, balding man in his early 60s who lived 2 properties away and plowed both roads during heavy snow. Wesley had already named him as the emergency support person, but Gideon wanted to hear the commitment directly.
"I can get here in 10 minutes unless the county road closes," Harold said. "If it closes, I'm usually the one opening it." "You comfortable helping an older, large dog into a vehicle?" Gideon asked. "Show me the right way." Gideon did. There was no ceremony in it. Harold practiced twice using the support sling Meredith had provided, first without Morrow and then with the dog bearing only part of his weight. Morrow tolerated the procedure with mild suspicion. By early afternoon, Gideon called Meredith on video. She watched Wesley guide Morrow up the rebuilt ramp. She asked about the ice, the medication schedule, the nearest emergency clinic, and the backup caregiver. Wesley answered each question plainly. When she asked why he had not resumed the adoption process years earlier, the barn seemed to become quieter. Wesley stood beside the workbench, one hand on Morrow's back. "My wife got sick the same month they told me he might retire," he said. "At first I thought I was postponing. Then she needed more care. After she died, enough time had passed that asking for him felt selfish." "Why?" Meredith asked. "Because I chose someone else." "You cared for your wife." "I still chose." Meredith studied him through the screen. "Morrow does not require you to prove that every decision in your life was perfect. He requires medication, safe footing, exercise appropriate to his age, and a stable person who will call for help when needed." Wesley glanced at Gideon. "I can do that." Gideon answered before Meredith could. He accepted every correction. "The property is workable now." Meredith nodded. "Then I'll authorize the transfer." The documents were signed at the old sorting table beneath the barn windows. Wesley read each page fully. His handwriting was narrow and careful. When the last signature was complete, Tessa removed North Star's temporary identification tag from Morrow's collar and replaced it with a plain brass tag bearing Wesley's address and phone number. The small click of the clasp sounded final. Morrow lay beneath the table, one paw touching Wesley's boot. Gideon packed the tools and returned the portable ramp to the van. Wesley followed him outside. The silver whistle lay in his palm again. "I thought I'd need this," he said. Gideon closed the side compartment where Morrow had traveled. "You might." "No." Wesley ran his thumb over the worn edge. "I kept it because it was the last thing that belonged to both of us. That's what I told myself." He looked toward the barn. Through the open door, Morrow was visible beside Tessa, waiting while Wesley finished outside. "But he came without it." Wesley held out the whistle. Gideon did not take it. "It's yours." "Not anymore." "I don't use whistles." "That may be why I'm giving it to you." The answer irritated Gideon slightly, mostly because he understood it. He accepted the whistle. The metal was cold and lighter than expected. A shallow dent marked one side. He slipped it into the front pocket of his coat rather than attaching it to his keys. Wesley walked back toward the barn. Morrow met him at the doorway, then turned and followed him inside without looking toward the van. Gideon stood in the snow longer than the paperwork required. Tessa joined him. "He didn't say goodbye to us," she said. "He wasn't supposed to." "No." The two of them returned to the van. When Gideon started the engine, the monitor showed 4 occupied compartments and 1 empty rectangle where Morrow had been. The absence looked larger on the screen than the compartment had looked while filled. Nix remained upright. Sable slept. Bracken rested his muzzle on the rope. Atlas rose. He turned his head toward the empty compartment, then toward the rear doors. His ears shifted as he listened to the altered sounds of the vehicle. One less breath. One less body moving with the engine. One less familiar scent circulating through the heated air. Atlas stood for several seconds. Then he lowered himself directly across the inside edge of his own door, body positioned between the compartment and the aisle beyond. Gideon watched through the monitor. "He's blocking the door," he said.
Not blocking, Tessa replied. Counting. Counting what? Who's left? Gideon reached into his coat pocket and felt the silver whistle, a tool once used to call a dog back. Now the dog it belonged to had stayed behind by choice. The van rolled away from the orchard. Through the side mirror, Wesley and Morrow became two dark shapes in the bright entrance of the barn, close enough to touch, but not performing the fact for anyone. At the first stop sign, Gideon opened Atlas's folder. The pages shifted with the movement of the heater. Beneath Jonah Creel's name, a new note from Clearwater Ridge had been clipped to the inside cover. Direct contact not authorized. Do not send personal clothing, recorded voice, or other scent-associated materials. Gideon read the lines twice. Behind him, Atlas remained stretched across the door of his compartment, keeping watch over the 4 dogs still moving west. The whistle rested in Gideon's pocket. He did not know yet whether it belonged to a reunion, a surrender, or a warning against confusing obedience with love. For the moment, he only knew that the van had one empty space, and Atlas had noticed before any of the humans were willing to name what it meant.
The county training center outside Wausau had been built for noise. Even in winter, the place seemed to remember whistles, shouted commands, kennel doors striking metal frames, and dogs launching over barriers at full speed. The old canine field sat behind the main administrative building, enclosed by a chain-link fence and a row of bare maples. Snow covered the low obstacles, softening their edges until the training equipment looked less like tools and more like shapes abandoned by another season. The center still operated, but this section had not been used regularly in years. A laminated notice had been tied to the gate before Gideon arrived. Private transfer, authorized personnel only. He parked beside a county maintenance truck and studied the lot before shutting off the engine. 1 gray sedan, 1 dark blue station wagon, 2 women waiting near the gate. On the monitor, Nix was already standing. The Malinois had sensed the change in speed 10 minutes earlier. Her long body faced the compartment door, ears high, amber-brown eyes fixed on the seam where daylight entered. She had not barked once during the drive. Her stillness carried more tension than noise would have. Tessa unfastened her seatbelt. "She knows the coat," she said. Dana Quill had sent an old work jacket to North Star 3 weeks earlier so Nix could encounter her scent before the transfer. It had been placed near the dog's bedding for short periods, never left long enough to become a substitute for a person. "You think scent changes the outcome?" Gideon asked. "No, it keeps the outcome from arriving without warning." Outside, the colder air carried a fine mist of snow that never became a real storm. Gideon took the documents from the glove compartment while Tessa checked Nix's leash, joints, and breathing. The taller of the 2 women approached first. Dana Quill was 52 and held herself with the precise economy of someone who had spent years making decisions before other people understood a decision was needed. She wore a dark cobalt technical jacket over a gray turtleneck, black work trousers, and low winter boots. Her ash-blonde hair had been cut into a long pixie, the front swept cleanly to one side. Nothing in her face suggested the easy sentiment of reunion. Her rectangular features remained composed, and her gray eyes went first to the van, then to Gideon, and finally to the paperwork in his hand. "You're Knox." "Dana Quill," she nodded once. The second woman remained closer to the gate. April Wren had a broader, more relaxed stance, one hand resting on the strap of a cloth bag worn across her chest. She was 48, with warm brown skin, short black curls silvering at the temples, and an expression that seemed capable of patience without becoming passive. "This is April," Dana said. "She has the approved placement." I read the file. April's mouth curved slightly. "I'm always glad to be introduced as a file." Gideon looked at her. "The file says your separation plan is complete." "It is. Existing dog, 12-year-old shepherd mix, quiet. Different section of the house for the first week. Solid interior door, separate yard rotation, scent exchange before visual contact." She answered without defensiveness or performance.
Gideon respected that more than warmth offered too quickly. Tessa brought Nix to the van's open rear door, but did not lower the ramp yet. The dog's gaze moved past Gideon and fixed on Dana. Dana did not step closer. For several seconds, no one spoke. The old field lay white and still behind them. Somewhere near the main building, a snowblower started, then faded as it moved around the far side of the property. Nix's nose lifted. Her weight shifted forward. Dana's right hand opened at her side, then closed again. Gideon noticed. So did Tessa. The ramp came down.
Nix descended carefully, front feet quick, hind legs more deliberate. Once on level ground, she stopped beside Tessa rather than pulling toward Dana. Dana's face changed by such a small degree that another person might have missed it. The mouth softened, the chin lowered. Nothing else moved. "Nix," she said. One word. No command inside it. Nix watched her. Dana raised her right hand to chest level, palm angled inward. A simple acknowledgement signal, not an order to close distance. The Malinois stepped forward. She stopped 3 paces away. Dana did not reach. Instead, she turned slightly toward the old training gate. "1 lap," she said to Gideon. "Then we complete the transfer." Gideon studied her. "You want privacy?" "No." "Why not?" "Because this is not private. There are custody documents, a receiving caregiver, and a dog who needs a clean transition." Her answer sounded prepared. That made him trust it less. "You could have requested direct adoption," he said. "I did not." "You could have changed your living situation." "I did not." "You still asked for a final handling session." Dana's eyes settled on him. "You think I want the emotional part without the responsibility?" Tessa glanced between them but did not intervene. April remained near the fence, neither defending Dana nor withdrawing from the tension. Gideon said, "Do I have that wrong?" Dana considered the question before replying. "Walk with us." The gate opened onto packed snow. Tessa handed Dana the faded red lead that had once belonged to Nix. Dana took it with both hands, as if the old leather carried more weight than its size allowed. Mix followed her onto the field. There was no sudden transformation into a younger dog. The Malinois did not spring toward the hurdles or search Dana's face for rapid commands. She moved with care, testing the surface beneath each paw. Dana shortened her stride to match. The first obstacle was a low platform almost hidden under snow. Dana brushed it clear with one boot, then gave a small downward signal. Nix placed her front feet on the platform. Years earlier, she might have mounted it in one motion. Now she paused before bringing up the hind legs. Dana waited. "Good," she said quietly. They crossed to a row of weave poles. Dana did not guide Nix through the full pattern. She walked beside the poles and let the dog pass between only the last 2. At the far fence, Dana stopped. Nix stood next to her, breathing lightly. Gideon and Tessa remained several yards back. April watched from near the gate, giving the pair enough distance without pretending she was absent. Dana looked across the empty training yard. When she strained her shoulder, the veterinarian ordered 6 weeks of restricted work, she said. Gideon waited. I gave her 9 days. Tessa's expression tightened. Dana kept her eyes on the field. The injury looked minor. Nix still wanted to work. She watched the equipment room every morning.
If I picked up another dog's lead, she paced. That doesn't mean she was fit, Gideon said. No. Then why put her back?
Because I told myself frustration was worse for her than pain.
The answer came without an attempt to soften it.
Dana ran one thumb over the red lead. The truth was simpler. I did not know who I was if she stopped before I did.
Nix lowered her head to sniff the snow.
Dana continued. We finished that season. We passed evaluations. Everyone called her committed. I called her strong. Her jaw shifted once. What I meant was useful. The word changed the air more than an apology would have. Gideon had expected excuses. Department pressure, limited staffing, a supervisor's order, a misunderstanding of the injury.
Dana gave him none. "She recovered," Dana said, "but I kept the lesson too long. I believed love meant refusing to separate, even when separation was the responsible choice." Gideon looked toward April. "You travel for work?" he asked Dana.
3 weeks out of every 6. Apartment? 3rd floor, no yard, narrow stairs. You could move. Yes. Change jobs. Yes. You're saying no before trying. Dana turned to him fully. No, I am saying I know what my life is, not what guilt would like it to become for 6 months. Nix raised her head at the change in Dana's voice. Dana immediately relaxed her grip on the lead. I could take her, she said. People would call it loyalty. There would be photographs. She would sleep beside my door while I packed another suitcase, and I would hire strangers to rotate through my apartment because I wanted to be the person who brought her home. She looked toward April. April can give her one house, one schedule, and fewer reasons to remain alert. April did not smile at the praise. Provided she accepts the arrangement. Dana nodded. Provided she accepts it. That condition mattered. For the first time, Gideon understood that neither woman had come to divide Nix between them. They had come to see which direction the dog could take without being pulled. They completed the lap without more conversation. Near the gate, Nix noticed April. April did not face her directly. She opened the cloth bag and removed a short section of leash identical in weight to the red one, but newer, dark brown, with a padded loop. She placed it on the snow between them. No food, no toy, nothing designed to purchase attention. Nix approached, sniffed the leash, then April's boot. April let her hand hang loosely at her side. Dana gave the lead to Tessa, while Meredith joined by video call from North Star's temporary office. The transfer process began. April reviewed the feeding schedule, arthritis monitoring, household separation plan, emergency contact, and the conditions of the trial period. She understood that legal custody would transfer, but North Star's receiving partner retained follow-up authority for 30 days. Meredith asked April what she would do if Nix refused food for more than a day. Call you before changing the diet. If she guards an exit? I don't crowd the door. I reduce movement, give her a clear route, and log what happened before the behavior. If she fixates on Dana after visits, we pause visits. Dana looked down at that answer. April added, not as punishment, as transition. Meredith approved. The signatures were placed on a folding table inside the administration building. Dana did not sign as owner. She signed only as prior handler and behavioral history witness. Gideon watched her write her name. The distinction seemed to cost her more than the confession on the field. Tessa removed North Star's temporary tag from Nix's collar. April attached a plain identification plate and the receiving organization's contact tag. The red lead remained in Dana's hand. Outside, the snow had thinned to almost nothing. The final transfer took place inside the fenced field rather than beside the vehicles. Dana stood on Nix's left. April stood several feet ahead and to the right. Tessa held the new brown lead but left it slack between herself and April. Gideon stayed near the gate with the documents. Dana knelt only far enough to bring her hand level with Nix's chest. She touched the dog once beneath the collar, a brief contact without clinging. You're done, she said. Nix looked at her. Dana rose. She extended 2 fingers downward and slightly away from her body. The old end-of-shift signal. Nix had seen it hundreds of times. It had once meant leave the vehicle, release the search, return to the kennel, stop carrying the day. This time, there was no old kennel waiting. The dog remained still. Dana's hand did not waver. Gideon felt the scene balancing on something quieter than command. Dana could call Nix back with one word. She could confuse the transfer by kneeling again. She could ask the dog to make her feel forgiven. She did none of those things. Nix turned her head toward April. April did not call. The Malinois stepped once, stopped, then crossed the space between them. April took the new lead only after Nick stood beside her. Dana lowered her hand. Her face stayed composed, but she no longer looked like someone protecting herself from emotion. She looked like someone allowing it to pass through without changing the decision. Nick glanced back. Dana's lips parted. No sound came. April walked toward the gate, letting Nick set the pace. The Malinois followed. That was all. No embrace, no return. No reward for choosing correctly. At April's station wagon, Nix paused before the open crate. April had arranged it with bedding carrying the scent of her house, but not the other dog. Both side panels were uncovered so Nix could see through. She stepped in. April secured the door and waited beside the vehicle until Nix lay down.
Dana stood across the lot holding the red lead. Gideon joined her. "You were right," he said. Dana looked at him. "About what?" "That taking her would have been for you."
"No," she said. "I was right today." The correction was immediate. "I've been wrong before. I can be wrong again. That's why there is a trial period." Gideon nodded. It was not humility performed for approval. It was structure placed around love so love could not become an excuse again. Tessa's ride back to North Star arrived 15 minutes later, a maintenance employee collecting equipment from the county center. She loaded her duffel into the pickup, but returned to the van before leaving. Gideon stood beside the open passenger door. "You know the medication times," she said. "They're written down. Bracken needs the longer break before Eau Claire. I know. Sable responds better if you enter her sightline before touching the latch. I know." Tessa looked toward the rear cabin.
Atlas may stop settling as the group gets smaller. He'll adjust. Maybe. He's a dog, Tessa. I can't explain the itinerary to him. No. She zipped her coat higher against the wind. But you can stop opening doors, removing someone, and driving away as if nothing happened. Gideon's expression hardened slightly. You think I should give him a briefing? I think you should let him hear a voice that stays. The remark landed too close to something he had no intention of discussing in a county parking lot. He doesn't understand the words. He understands disappearance. The maintenance driver sounded the horn once. Tessa stepped away, then stopped. And Gideon? What? Don't mistake him being quiet for him being fine. She left before he could answer. When Gideon returned to the driver's seat, the passenger side felt abruptly larger. Tessa's mustard-colored glove lay forgotten near the cup holder. He picked it up, intending to call after her, but the maintenance pickup had already turned onto the county road. On the monitor, 3 dogs remained. Sable was asleep. Bracken's long ears rested over his rope. Atlas stood with his attention fixed on the empty passenger seat visible through the cabin partition. Gideon started the engine. He waited. Then, feeling foolish before he had even begun, he spoke toward the rear. Tessa went back to North Star. Atlas's ears shifted. We're continuing west. No reaction. Nix has a placement. The words sounded absurd in the enclosed cab. Administrative language offered to a dog. Atlas sat down, not relaxed, but listening. Gideon placed Tessa's glove on the passenger seat and pulled onto the road. 10 minutes later, his phone chimed with a message from Meredith. He expected a medication update or confirmation that Nix's transfer had been entered. Instead, the text contained 4 lines. Atlas foster placement withdrawn. Caregiver hospitalized this morning. No alternate approved at present. Continue route. Call me when safely stopped. Gideon read the message once at a red light, then again after pulling into a service lane. The van heater moved warm air through the cab. Outside, traffic passed in thin gray streams beneath the winter sky. On the monitor, Atlas had finally lowered himself near the compartment door. 3 dogs remained in the vehicle. 2 had confirmed destinations. 1 did not. Until that moment, Gideon had treated Atlas's incomplete file as a delay, an administrative gap that capable people would close before he reached Minnesota. Now the gap had become the destination. There was no foster home waiting beyond the next county line, no approved person preparing a room, no confirmed address that could be entered into his notebook.
Gideon looked at the empty passenger seat, the mustard glove, and then the monitor. Atlas rested his silvered muzzle across his front paws. The dog was quiet. Gideon no longer mistook that for being fine. The old Eau Claire station still had a clock above the entrance, though no trains had stopped beneath it in 27 years. Its hands had been fixed at 4:12 for as long as anyone could remember. Snow rested along the stone ledges and filled the grooves between the brickwork. The former platform had been enclosed with tall windows, and warm light spread through them onto the white pavement outside. A sign beside the doors read, "Riverline Veterans Community Center," the lettering painted over the faint outline of the railroad company that had once owned the building. Gideon parked near the accessible entrance and checked the rear monitor. Bracken had fallen asleep with his chin over the old tow rope. Atlas lay awake near his compartment door. Sable stood. The elderly German shepherd had not shown much interest in the road after Wausau, but the change in engine vibration had brought her to her feet. Her sable coat had faded to gray-brown along the ribs and face. One ear leaned toward the front of the van, though sound no longer reached her clearly enough to explain what was happening. Gideon shut off the engine but left the auxiliary heat running. There were only 3 dogs now. The number altered everything inside the van. Less shifting, less breath against the partitions, more room for every movement to be noticed. He opened the rear cabin and stepped deliberately into Sable's field of vision before touching her latch. Tessa's instruction had become habit faster than he expected. Sable watched his hand. He raised 2 fingers, lowered his palm, and waited. She did not know him well enough to trust the signal immediately. Her eyes moved from his hand to the ramp and back again. "No hurry," Gideon said. The words were not for obedience, he understood that now. A woman stood inside the center's glass doors with both hands clasped near her waist. She had arrived early enough to watch the van park but had not come outside.
Mavis Eleanor Shawcross looked smaller behind the glass than she had in the file photograph. She was 60, narrow through the shoulders, wearing a long blue-violet wool coat and a gray scarf. Silver hair curled softly at her shoulders. Round glasses reflected the lobby lights, hiding her eyes whenever she turned her head. Beside her waited a man holding a steel travel mug. Owen Patrick Sturgis had the settled build of someone who no longer fought age, but refused to surrender usefulness to it. He was 64, broad-faced, with close-cut silver hair and a curved mustache. A thick brown cardigan covered a pale blue work shirt. A ring of facility keys rested at his belt. He did not stand in front of Mavis. He stood slightly behind and to one side, close enough to help, without announcing that help might be needed. Gideon lowered the ramp. Sable stepped down in stages. Her front paws reached the pavement, but she hesitated before shifting her hindquarters. Gideon kept the support strap loose beneath her abdomen, giving balance without lifting. When all 4 paws were on level ground, Mavis pushed open the door. "Sable." The dog did not turn. Mavis stopped after 1 step. "Sable!" she called again, louder. The German shepherd continued examining the salt-streaked pavement. A small embarrassment moved across Mavis's face, followed quickly by something more painful. She had expected recognition and received what looked, from a distance, like indifference. "She doesn't hear much above a low register anymore," Gideon said. "I know. It was in the report. Knowing on paper is different." Mavis looked at him, then at Sable. "Yes," she said, "it usually is." She did not call again. Instead, Gideon showed her the visual greeting Meredith had documented. Enter from the dog's left side, remain within sight, keep the hand below shoulder level. Mavis moved carefully. Sable saw her when she was 6 feet away. The dog's ears shifted unevenly. Her head rose. She did not rush forward or wag with the bright certainty Mavis had likely imagined on nights when she'd planned this moment. She smelled the air. Then she looked past Mavis toward the open doors. Mavis lowered her hand. Sable approached close enough to inspect the cuff of her coat. She breathed in once, slowly, and moved on toward the building. Mavis's hand remained suspended after the dog had passed. Owen opened the second door. "She found the warm air," he said gently. Mavis let her hand fall. Leonard used to say she had excellent priorities. The center retained the bones of the station. The former ticket counter had become a reception desk. Old route maps hung above shelves of board games and donated books. The waiting room now held broad chairs, 2 long tables, a stone fireplace, and a coffee station under a sign warning people not to complain unless they were willing to make the next pot. 4 adult veterans occupied the room that morning. None approached Sable.
Owen had already explained the transition rules. No crowding, no calling, no feeding, no attempts to become the first favorite person. Gideon noticed one man place a biscuit back into his pocket when Sable entered. That single act told him Owen had prepared them better than many homes he had inspected. "This way," Mavis said. She led them down a short hallway into what had once been the station master's office. Leonard had used the room as a woodworking shop during the final years of his life. A scarred bench ran beneath the window. Hand tools hung in careful outlines on a pegboard. Sandpaper, clamps, and small unfinished boxes occupied the shelves. The room had been cleaned, but not emptied. An olive work coat hung inside a narrow cabinet. Below it sat a wooden toolbox with brass corners. A folded dog mattress rested on the top shelf, protected inside a clear storage cover. Mavis unfastened the cover. "I washed it," she said. Then I wondered whether I had washed away the only useful part. "Scent stays in more than fabric," Owen said. Mavis glanced at him. "That sounds like something you read." "It is." Sable entered behind Gideon. She explored without urgency. The dog moved along the workbench, sniffed the lower cabinets, paused at a pile of cedar offcuts, and examined an old wastebasket as if it contained the room's most valuable history. Mavis watched every movement. When Sable reached the open cabinet, her body stilled. Her nose moved along the hem of Leonard's coat. Mavis pressed her lips together. The dog stood there for several seconds, breathing in the scent embedded in canvas, dust, wood oil, and years of human use. Mavis lifted the mattress from the shelf and placed it on the floor. "There," she whispered. Sable looked at it. She stepped forward, sniffed one corner, then turned away. The refusal was not dramatic. That made it harder. Mavis lowered herself onto a chair beside the workbench. "She used to sleep on that in his garage." 8 months is a long time, Gideon said. "For a dog? For a room?" Mavis removed her glasses and wiped them with the edge of her scarf, even though the lenses were not fogged. He said she should remember him standing. Gideon looked toward her. Mavis kept her attention on the glasses. Leonard's health declined faster near the end. He could still walk, but not far. His hands shook. Some days he couldn't manage the steps outside. She replaced the glasses. "I contacted North Star. They offered to bring Sable for a visit." He declined. 3 times. Sable had moved to the doorway. She looked down the hall toward the sounds she could feel more clearly than hear. Chair legs shifting, cups placed on tables, the low vibration of voices in the larger room. Mavis continued. "He told me dogs don't need to watch us become less than what we were." The sentence remained between them. It was not Leonard's exact belief that unsettled Gideon. It was how easily he recognized its architecture. A person changed. A body became evidence. Love was renamed protection, and distance was offered as proof of care. Jonah Creel's instructions returned to him. No direct meeting, no recorded voice, no scent-associated materials. Gideon had read those lines as rejection. Now they looked more like a door someone had locked from the inside. "Did you agree with him?" he asked. Mavis's expression tightened. "No. But you honored it." "He was dying." "That doesn't make every decision correct." "No." Her reply was sharper than anything she had said so far. "It makes some of them impossible to take away without becoming cruel." Gideon accepted the correction. Mavis looked toward Sable. "I thought there would be time for him to change his mind. People use that belief to excuse a great deal." Sable left the room. Mavis stood quickly, but Owen touched 2 fingers to his own chest, a quiet reminder not to follow too close. They watched from the hallway. The dog entered the main waiting room and began checking its boundaries. First the glass entrance, then the corridor toward the kitchen, then the wide archway leading to the former platform room. She paused beside each opening and looked back toward the center. No one called her. A gray-haired man at the coffee table shifted his chair aside to give her space. Sable completed one slow circuit and lay down beside the main exit, where she could see most of the room. The folded mattress remained in Leonard's workshop. Mavis stood beside Gideon in the hallway. She chose the door. She chose the room, Owen said. Mavis turned toward him. Owen lifted his travel mug slightly. The door is where she can watch all of us. The distinction altered her face. Not enough to remove grief, enough to make space beside it. The transfer could not be approved on symbolism alone. Owen showed Gideon the small apartment behind the former platform. It had a private entrance, a living room with broad paths between furniture, and no interior stairs. Sable's bed had been placed near the doorway between Owen's room and the hall, not beside the public entrance. Her food and water station sat in a quiet alcove near the kitchen. The water bowl was too close to a humming refrigerator. Sable approached, lowered her nose, then backed away. She hasn't drunk since the road stop, Gideon said. Owen frowned. Fresh bowl, same water we use. It's not the water. He placed 2 fingers against the floor. The refrigerator motor sent a faint vibration through the tile. Sable's hearing loss had changed what noises reached her, but low mechanical resonance still registered. Gideon called Meredith. She watched by video while Owen moved the bowls into the carpeted hallway near his apartment door. He added a rubber mat beneath them and reduced movement in the area. Sable approached again. She sniffed the water but did not drink. Give her distance, Meredith said through the phone. No one stand over her. Owen, use the visual release signal from the file. Owen moved into Sable's sightline. His gestures were slower than Tessa's, but accurate. He raised his palm, turned it outward, then lowered it. All clear. Sable looked at him. Owen stepped back and sat in a chair. The room resumed its ordinary activity. Coffee poured. Someone turned a newspaper page. A man near the window complained quietly that the crossword had confused a river in Ohio with one in Pennsylvania. After nearly 3 minutes, Sable lowered her head and drank. Owen did not praise her. He noted the time on the care sheet. That restraint mattered to Gideon. The center's insurance rider had already been amended. Visitors would be informed that Sable was a retired working dog, not a public therapy animal. No one could approach or touch her without Owen's permission. Mavis would hold legal guardianship and make medical decisions. Owen accepted daily responsibility. 2 trained backup caregivers had been named for emergencies. This was not a group adopting a symbol. It was a placement built around one accountable person. The documents were spread across an old station desk beneath the frozen clock. Mavis signed first. Her hand trembled only when she reached the line marked Relationship to Former Handler. She wrote, Sister. Owen signed the daily care agreement with the practical concentration of a man approving a furnace repair. When everything was complete, Gideon removed North Star's temporary tag from Sable's collar. Mavis attached a new brass plate bearing her telephone number on one side and Owen's on the other. Sable remained beside the exit. Before Gideon left, Mavis returned to Leonard's workshop and brought out the olive coat. She laid it over the back of a chair several feet from Sable. The dog noticed. She rose, walked over, and smelled the sleeve. Mavis held her breath. Sable did not lie beneath it. She returned to her place near the entrance and lowered herself where she could watch Owen, Mavis, and the veterans in the room. Mavis sat in the chair under Leonard's coat. Her fingers rested against the worn canvas. She remembers him, she said. Gideon looked at Sable. Yes. But she isn't waiting for him. No. The answer could have sounded cruel. Instead, it seemed to release something Mavis had been carrying on Leonard's behalf. Owen placed his steel mug on the floor beside his chair. The small metallic sound drew Sable's attention. She glanced at him, then settled her muzzle onto her paws.
A new routine had begun with nothing more dramatic than a bowl moved away from a refrigerator, a man sitting where the dog could see him, and a room allowed to become present tense again. Gideon returned to the van shortly before dusk. Bracken lifted his head when the door opened. Atlas stood before Gideon touched the latch. Only 2 occupied compartments appeared on the monitor now.
Gideon sat in the driver's seat and opened his notebook. He wrote Sable's transfer time, Owen's number, and the location of the emergency veterinary clinic. His phone rang before he finished. Lorna. The background behind her voice sounded hollow. "We closed the main kennel wing," she said. "I thought that was tomorrow." The furnace inspector came back. Carbon monoxide readings rose near the utility corridor. "We shut it down at 2. "Everyone out?" "Yes. Remaining supplies moved. Staff cleared." The words were calm, but Gideon heard a key strike something metallic on her end of the call. Perhaps the wooden North Star on Lorna's ring. Perhaps a door locking sooner than expected. "What happens to Atlas's guardianship?" he asked. "North Star can maintain temporary legal custody through the transfer agreement, but not indefinitely. The receiving coalition needs a confirmed placement before the current authorization expires." "How long?" "Long enough to finish this route."
Not long enough to keep pretending the blank line is harmless. Gideon looked at Atlas on the monitor. The shepherd had lain down again, but his head remained raised.
"Meredith found another foster," Lorna said. "Specialized placement outside 2 harbors. Experienced with retired working dogs. Stable caregiver, quiet property." That was fast. It was already a secondary contact. Meredith accelerated the inspection. "Approved?" "Conditionally. Final video review tomorrow." "And Jonah?" There was a pause. "The foster is more than an hour from Clearwater Ridge. It is not structured around visits." "So Atlas goes there and never sees him?" "If Jonah continues to refuse, yes." Gideon looked through the windshield at the old station. Warm light filled the tall windows. Inside, Sable lay near the door among people who had not known her during service and could not replace the man who had. She had remembered Leonard. Then she had chosen the living room. Gideon no longer believed memory and change were enemies. But he also did not believe one person's shame should decide which of them a dog was allowed to carry. "Send me the foster file," he said. "I already did." The call ended. Gideon opened Atlas's folder and placed the new conditional address behind Jonah Creel's contact sheet. For the first time, the file contained a real destination. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it made the choice more visible. Atlas could have safety without recognition. Jonah could preserve the version of himself he preferred the dog to remember. Everyone could claim the responsible decision had been made. Gideon turned toward the rear cabin. "Sable stayed," he said. Atlas's ears moved. "She has someone responsible for her." The dog watched him through the camera. Gideon did not know whether speaking helped Atlas. He only knew silence had begun to feel too much like making decisions in another creature's absence.
Outside, Mavis appeared behind the station window. She sat beneath Leonard's old coat while Owen poured coffee for the room. Sable remained near the entrance, awake but no longer waiting for a door to return someone who was gone. Gideon started the engine. Atlas was the last dog in the van whose past had not been allowed into the same room as its future. And now, for the first time, there was a safe place waiting for him. It simply was not the place he might have chosen. Duluth appeared beneath a sky the color of worn silver. The road descended toward Lake Superior through neighborhoods built into the hills, where snow had gathered on stone retaining walls and the roofs of narrow houses. Far below, the frozen harbor reflected the late afternoon light in broad white sheets broken by dark channels of open water. Only 2 dogs remained in the van. Bracken slept through most of the descent, his long ears spread over the frayed tow rope beneath his muzzle. Atlas stayed awake in the rear compartment, watching each turn through the partition window. The reduced weight inside the vehicle had changed its sound. Every rattle seemed sharper, every stop carried farther through the empty compartments.
Gideon disliked how quickly absence became part of the machinery. He followed the navigation route toward the old warehouse district near the waterfront. The buildings there had once stored grain, ship parts, and lumber. Now their lower floors held coffee shops, frame makers, bicycle repair stores, and businesses that relied on people willing to search for them. Corinne Vassal's shop occupied the corner of a narrow brick building. A modest sign above the door read, "Vassal Stringed Instrument Repair." 3 violins hung in the front window beside a handwritten notice promising bow rehairing, bridge work, and winter humidity checks. Warm amber light filled the shop. Inside, a woman stood behind a workbench beneath a row of suspended tools. She saw the van. She did not move toward the door. Gideon parked at the curb and checked the address again. Bracken lifted his head before the engine stopped. His nose began working at once. The bloodhound was 11, heavy through the chest, with loose russet skin around his neck and a muzzle faded almost white. He did not rise quickly. He gathered each leg beneath himself, shifted his weight, and then stood facing the side door. Gideon's phone rang. The number matched Corinne's file. He answered without taking his eyes from the shop window. "Knox? Take him to Edwin's house." The woman's voice was low and controlled. "You requested this stop?" "I changed my mind." "Your brother's transfer appointment is at 5:30. Then you have time." Gideon looked through the glass. Corinne remained behind the workbench, one hand resting beside a black fountain pen. "You're 30 feet away," he said. "That does not change the destination." "No, it changes whether you intend to complete your statement." Silence. Bracken pressed his nose toward the narrow gap beneath the door. Corinne said, "The statement is not part of the transfer. It is part of his record. I can send it later." "You've been able to send it for months." The hand beside the fountain pen closed. Gideon ended the call. He opened the van's side door and clipped the lead to Bracken's harness. The dog descended using the low ramp, pausing when his front paws touched the snowy pavement. The harbor wind moved through the street, carrying salt, old brick, engine exhaust, coffee, resin, wood dust, and the faint mineral smell of lake ice. Bracken turned toward the shop. Gideon did not guide him there. The bloodhound chose the direction himself. He crossed the sidewalk slowly and stopped before the glass door. His nose traced the lower frame. Then he sat. No pawing, no whining, no demand. He simply placed his body in front of the entrance and waited. Inside, Corinne looked at him. She was 59, narrow through the shoulders, with a long face and a pointed chin. Her salt and pepper hair ended cleanly at the jaw. A black turtleneck and burgundy wool jacket gave her the formal appearance of someone prepared to be observed but not approached. A brown leather apron covered her clothes, marked with pale scratches from tools and instrument edges. Her hand stayed flat against the workbench. Bracken's ears shifted in the wind. Gideon stood beside him. Minutes passed. People crossed at the far end of the street. A delivery truck backed into an alley. Somewhere inside the building, a piano repeated the same 4 notes, stopped, and began again. Corinne finally turned the lock. She opened the door only halfway. "Bring him in before his joints get cold." The sentence carried no welcome. Gideon accepted it anyway. The shop smelled of varnish, spruce, maple, hide glue, and metal strings. Instrument cases lined one wall. Tiny labeled drawers filled another. Under a hanging lamp, an old cello rested open on a padded bench, its bridge removed. Bracken entered and stood near the doorway. Corinne did not call his name. She removed her leather apron and folded it over the back of a chair. Her fingers trembled once while undoing the neck strap. "He looks older," she said. "He is older." That was not an accusation.
It sounded like surprise. Corinne looked directly at him. Her eyes were dark blue and tired in a way that did not ask for sympathy. Bracken moved past her toward an iron radiator along the wall.
He lowered himself onto the rug beside it, arranged the old rope beneath one paw, and sighed. Corinne watched him settle. "He always found heat," she said, "even on searches, vehicle floor, generator housing, sunlit concrete." Bracken closed his eyes. No recognition scene arrived to rescue either of them. Corinne crossed to a narrow desk near the rear of the shop and removed several typed pages from a folder. Gideon saw the heading: Formal Correction to Operational Record, Bracken County Search Unit. The document was dated 4 months earlier. "You wrote it," he said. "Yes." "But never sent it?" "No." "Why?" Corinne aligned the pages even though they were already straight. "Because writing something and making it public are different acts." "That is usually the point." Her jaw tightened.
The search had happened 6 years earlier in northern Wisconsin. A man in his 40s disappeared during early spring, when thawing snow had turned forest roads into mud and streams into fast black water. Bracken had indicated a route toward an abandoned logging cut. Corinne's supervisor ordered the team south instead, based on an unverified witness report. Hours were lost. When the search ended without recovery, public pressure followed. The official review described Bracken as having failed to maintain a reliable scent line. Corinne knew the language was false. She also knew the decision to abandon the original route had come from above her. "You signed the report?" Gideon asked. "I signed the section confirming deployment time and conditions." "You didn't challenge the conclusion?" "No." "Why?" Corinne glanced toward Bracken. "At first, because the unit commander told me the wording protected the county from liability." "And later?" "Because challenging it would have meant admitting I followed an order I believed was wrong." The radiator clicked. Bracken did not lift his head. Corinne took the black fountain pen from the desk and rolled it beneath her fingers. "The family wanted a reason," she continued. "The press wanted a failure they could understand. A dog losing a trail was easier than a chain of adults choosing certainty over evidence." "And you let him carry it?" "Yes." She did not say the words softly. That refusal to ask for comfort made Gideon listen more carefully. "I left the unit the next year," she said. "I told myself that was consequence enough." "It wasn't." "No." Corinne looked at the unsigned line at the bottom of the correction. "I have sent money anonymously to Bracken's care fund every year." "That paid for food." "Yes." "It did not repair the record." "No." Her agreement was becoming almost severe, as though punishment felt safer than action. Gideon took out his phone. "Meredith needs to witness the correction." Corinne's eyes narrowed. "She is a veterinarian. She represents the organization holding his current file. Your statement changes the history used for placement and behavioral review." "That sounds bureaucratic." "It is." For the first time, something close to frustration broke through her control. "You think paperwork has moral weight?" "I think the wrong paperwork followed him for 6 years." The words stopped her. Bracken shifted beside the radiator and pressed his muzzle more firmly against the rope. Corinne looked at the dog. Then she unlocked her phone. The video call connected with Meredith in a temporary office at North Star's partner organization. Behind her, cardboard file boxes had replaced the familiar examination room. Meredith reviewed the document line by line. Corinne stated her full name, former position, the date of the search, and the chain of decisions that had redirected the team. She confirmed that Bracken had maintained a viable scent indication and that no evidence supported the claim he had failed. Her voice remained steady until Meredith asked one final question. "Why are you correcting this now?" Corinne looked toward the radiator. "Because delay has become another version of the original act." Meredith nodded once. "Sign it." Corinne uncapped the fountain pen. The nib hovered above the paper. Gideon expected hesitation. Instead, Corinne signed in one clean movement. The rehook did not come from Bracken. It came from what Corinne did next. She opened her email and attached the document while Gideon watched. She entered the addresses one at a time: the former unit administrator, the county records office, the newspaper that had published the original account, the current custodian of Bracken's service file, and the attorney who had represented the missing man's family. At the final address, her hand paused. "They may not want this," she said.
"That is not yours to decide." Corinne closed her eyes for a moment. Then she pressed send. The message left with no sound more dramatic than the quiet click of a key. Bracken slept through it. The absence of reaction stripped the act of any comforting illusion. The dog did not understand that his name had been cleared. He could not absolve her. He would not reward truth with affection simply because she had finally chosen it. Corinne sat beside the desk and looked older than when the door had opened. "I want him to stay tonight." Gideon put away his phone. "No." Her head rose. "He knows me." "This property has not been evaluated." "I have a workshop, a rear apartment, and no other animals." "You also have stairs, solvent storage, uncovered tools, and no approved emergency plan." "I can move things." "Not in the next 10 minutes. Corinne stood. "I corrected the record." "That does not change the transfer plan." "You brought him here." "For the approved contact and documentation." "He is mine." "No!" The word landed hard. Corinne's expression sharpened. "I handled him for 7 years." "And then?" Her eyes flashed. Gideon did not soften his tone. "Edwin completed the home inspection. Edwin has the fenced yard. Edwin has the backup caregiver. Your role is in the visitation agreement, not the ownership line." Corinne looked toward Bracken. For the first time, longing appeared without discipline around it. "I thought if I signed—" "You thought responsibility would become permission." She said nothing. Gideon understood the impulse better than he wanted to. People preferred repair to operate like payment: confess the truth, perform the difficult act, receive the lost thing back. But Bracken was not a receipt. Corinne knelt beside the radiator, leaving enough space that the dog could decide whether to close it. Bracken opened his eyes. She placed one hand on the floor. He sniffed her fingers. Then he rested his muzzle again. Corinne did not touch him. "All right," she said. The drive to Edwin's house took 25 minutes. Corinne followed in her own car. The city gave way to a quieter road beyond the western edge of Duluth, where one-story homes stood among leafless trees and fenced yards. Edwin Marcus Vassal waited beside a snow-cleared driveway, wearing a brown Sherpa-lined coat and dark green sweater. He was 62, taller and broader than his sister, with a round face, gray curling hair, and a short silver beard. He did not approach the van until Gideon signaled. "I put salt only on the front walk," Edwin said. "Back path is sanded. Vet said salt can irritate his paws." Gideon nodded. The yard inspection matched the file. The fence was secure. The back entrance had only one shallow step. A rubber runner covered the kitchen floor, and a padded bed had been placed away from the heating vent. A red kitchen timer sat beside labeled medication containers. Edwin noticed Gideon looking at it. "I forget clocks," he said. "I don't forget alarms." Bracken entered the yard and began a slow survey along the fence line. He did not search for Corinne. He followed scent where scent led. At the water bowl, he drank for nearly a full minute. Then he entered the kitchen, turned twice near the back door, and lay down. Edwin remained standing several feet away. "He'll come to me when he's ready," he said. Corinne held the old lead in both hands. The transfer documents were signed at the kitchen table. Edwin accepted legal custody and daily responsibility. Corinne signed the visitation and financial support agreement, which specified veterinary contributions and scheduled visits during the first month. "No unplanned arrivals," Edwin reminded her. "I read it." "I know. I'm saying it aloud." She looked at him, then nodded. Outside, twilight had begun to blue the snow. Corinne handed the lead to Edwin. For a second, neither sibling released it.
Then Corinne opened her fingers.
Edwin looped the leather over a hook by the door rather than clipping it immediately to Bracken. The dog was already asleep. Gideon returned to the van alone. Only Atlas remained. One dog in 5 compartments. The monitor made the interior look less like transport and more like an empty corridor. Gideon drove east toward a lakeside rest area before turning north. The parking lot overlooked a dark stretch of Superior where moving water remained between shelves of ice. He had barely stopped when his phone rang. Jonah Elias Creel. The voice on the line was lower than Gideon expected, clear and controlled. "You are transporting Atlas." "Yes." "Do not bring him to Clearwater Ridge." There was no introduction and no request for context. Gideon looked at the monitor. Atlas was standing. "You contacted North Star before," Gideon said. "I'm contacting you now." "Why?" "Because organizations sometimes hear refusal as distress and decide persistence is compassion." "You declined 3 visits."
I declined all visits.
"Atlas has an approved foster pending final review." "Then take him there." "You don't want to know where?" "No." The answer came too quickly. Jonah continued, "Do not play my recorded voice. Do not send clothing. Do not repeat old handling signals. Do not bring him near the center." "You're afraid he'll recognize you." "I know he will." Gideon leaned back in the driver's seat. Jonah's tone did not resemble a man who had forgotten a dog. It resembled someone reciting procedures around a danger he understood intimately. "He will stand near the door," Jonah said. "He will track every transfer. He will notice pain before I admit it. He will stay awake when I cannot sleep. If I lose balance, he will put his body between me and the floor even when that risks his hips." "You make that sound like a reason to disappear." "It is a reason not to ask him to work again." "He may not see it as work. I trained him. I know the difference." "You knew him before the injury."
Silence entered the line. When Jonah answered, the control in his voice had tightened. "And you have known him for 3 days." "That is true." "Then do not mistake proximity for understanding." Gideon's hand rested on the steering wheel. "Do not mistake history for ownership of every choice he makes." The call ended. No agreement, no raised voices, just 2 men certain the other had confused responsibility with control. Gideon contacted Meredith and Lorna from the rest area. He did not propose driving to Clearwater Ridge unannounced. He requested a supervised behavioral assessment contingent upon written consent from Jonah and the center. Meredith agreed only under strict conditions. Atlas would need a pre-visit evaluation. The center would choose a private space. Jonah would have to sign permission. The visit would not alter the approved foster plan unless later assessments supported a change. Lorna authorized the request. Clearwater Ridge said it would review the proposal. While they waited, Gideon opened the side door to give Atlas a break. Cold air entered the rear cabin. Atlas stood at the threshold but did not descend. "Come on," Gideon said. The dog looked past him toward the driver's compartment. Then Atlas stepped through the inner partition, something he had not attempted before. He reached the passenger seat, took Gideon's black glove gently between his teeth, and carried it back to the open side door. He placed it on the floor. Then he looked at Gideon. The action was simple enough to resist interpretation. The glove smelled of the person who had remained through every departure. Atlas may have wanted it near the exit. He may have associated it with movement. He may only have found an object within reach. Gideon did not call it a message, but he also did not ignore the choice. "You want someone to stay visible," he said. Atlas lowered his head over the glove. Gideon sat on the van step rather than pulling the dog outside. Lake wind moved across the lot. Ice clicked faintly near the shore. His phone chimed, a message from Clearwater Ridge. "Private assessment space approved for tomorrow, 9 a.m., clinical staff available, veterinary participation permitted remotely." A second line followed. "Visit remains pending written consent from Jonah Creel." Gideon looked at Atlas. There was now a room,
A time, a legal path, but no permission. Atlas rested one paw beside the glove and watched him. For the first time since leaving North Star, the route was no longer blocked by distance, regulations, or an absent address. It was blocked by one man's signature, and Jonah Creel had not given it. Clearwater Ridge did not look like a place built around loss. Morning light spread across the frozen lake north of Duluth, turning the snow almost blue beneath a clear winter sky. The rehabilitation center stood on a low rise above the shoreline, its pale stone walls broken by wide windows and covered walkways. Paths had been cleared between the main building, therapy wing, and residential cottages. Along the railings, strips of dark rubber marked where gloved hands had worn the metal smooth. Gideon parked near the occupational therapy entrance at 8:37 a.m. Atlas stood behind him in the only occupied compartment. The dog had eaten half his breakfast and accepted water during the morning stop. His movements remained steady. Meredith had completed a remote behavioral review before sunrise and found no medical reason to cancel the meeting. There was still no signed permission from Jonah. Gideon left the auxiliary heat running and entered the building alone. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee, floor cleaner, and wet wool. No one lowered their voice when a wheelchair passed. No one looked away too quickly. Staff members moved with the practical ease of people accustomed to bodies working in different ways. Mara Elise Hensley met Gideon beside a wall of framed landscape photographs. She was 46, with brown gold hair tied back by a blue cloth band and a face that appeared gentle until she began asking questions. A sea green sweater showed beneath her cream cardigan. A measuring tape hung from one pocket, and her employee badge rested against her hip rather than her chest. "You arrived early," she said. "I was told 9. "It is 8:38. "That is early." Mara studied him for half a second. "You and Jonah may enjoy each other more than either of you expects." "I doubt that." "So does he." She led Gideon through a corridor toward a private consultation room. The windows along one side overlooked the lake. On the other, therapy spaces held parallel bars, adjustable counters, practice stairs, and mock sections of kitchen and bathroom. Jonah Creel waited inside. The first thing Gideon noticed was not the wheelchair. It was the posture. Jonah sat upright in a matte gray titanium chair, shoulders level, hands resting lightly on black push rims. He wore a navy Henley beneath a charcoal fleece vest and dark adaptive trousers. His hair was nearly white, cut short but not severe, with the front lifting slightly from his forehead. His face narrowed from a broad brow to a firm chin. Dark eyes held the sharp, unsentimental attention of someone accustomed to reading hesitation in others. A short red clicker cord hung from a small pouch behind the chair. Jonah noticed Gideon notice it. "You can stop inventorying the equipment," he said. "I was looking at the man using it." "That is what people say after they get caught looking at the chair." Mara closed the door. "Before either of you turns this into a contest," she said, "the purpose of this meeting is to decide whether direct contact can occur safely. It is not an adoption hearing, a reconciliation ceremony, or a test of anyone's moral character." Jonah looked at Gideon. "You hear that?" "I heard it." "Good. Then take Atlas to the foster placement." Gideon remained standing. "You have not seen him. I have seen every report. Reports do not look back." Jonah's jaw tightened. Mara moved to the side of the room rather than between them. Her presence did not reduce the tension. It prevented either man from pretending the other had trapped him there alone. Jonah said, "My housing after discharge is not settled. My current strength is inconsistent. I cannot safely lift an 11-year-old shepherd if his hips fail on ice. I cannot guarantee his exercise schedule. I cannot promise I will be the same person every day after therapy." "No one asked you to promise that. You brought him here." "For an assessment." "You drove across 3 states because a dog looked at a glove." Gideon's expression shifted only slightly. "So that detail reached you." Mara read the transport report. "I read the report,"
Mara corrected. I did not interpret the glove as prophecy. Jonah ignored her. You have known Atlas for 3 days. I worked beside him for 7 years. And that gives you the right to refuse his side of the relationship? It gives me the right not to reactivate a working pattern that will exhaust him. You do not know that will happen. I know how he responds to pain. Gideon stepped closer to the table. You know how he responded to you before your injury. Jonah's hands closed around the push rims. The room became still. Mara spoke quietly. That is the part we are here to assess. Jonah looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, sunlight lay across the lake without movement.
A pair of staff members crossed the path below, one carrying folded towels, the other pushing a cart of adaptive equipment. I cannot take him home, Jonah said. You do not have a home available yet, Gideon replied. I am aware. You keep describing a temporary condition as a final answer. Jonah turned back. And you keep describing attachment as if it automatically outranks capacity. Gideon said nothing. Jonah continued. You think this is about shame. I think shame is doing some of the talking. You think because I use a chair, I believe I am less of a man. I think you believe being seen in need will change what he remembers. The words landed cleanly. Jonah's face did not collapse. He became more controlled. That is an impressive conclusion from someone who has spent 3 days driving him around. Gideon felt the old instinct to shut down, reduce the conversation to logistics, and leave before anything personal became usable against him. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat. Deserve a dog named Harker, he said. Jonah did not move. Gideon rested his hands on his knees. Harker was not mine, not officially. He worked with another handler, but our teams overlapped for several months. Maritime searches, vessel work, confined spaces. He learned my voice. I learned when he was about to refuse a bad surface before his handler noticed. Mara stayed quiet. When the unit reorganized, Harker transferred, Gideon continued. His handler sent me the new contact information. I never used it. Why? I told myself the attachment belonged to the assignment. Jonah watched him more carefully now. Years later, I learned he had retired with a family in Oregon. He died there. Old, comfortable, nothing tragic. Gideon looked down once, then back up. I was relieved. Jonah's mouth tightened. That is not the part people usually admit. No. The part that stayed with me was not losing him. It was knowing I had been offered a chance to say goodbye and decided distance was cleaner. The room held that confession without rewarding it. Jonah said, So this is about you? Partly. Mara glanced at Gideon, perhaps surprised by the answer. He continued, That is why I'm not asking you to take Atlas today. I am asking you not to use silence as a decision-making tool and call it protection. Jonah looked toward the door. For several seconds, the only sound was the faint movement of the ventilation system. Then he said, If he enters and becomes hypervigilant, the meeting ends. Yes. If he blocks staff movement, the meeting ends. Yes. If he shows distress when separated, he goes directly to the foster placement. Yes. And this is not adoption. No. Jonah looked at Mara. She placed the consent form on the table. You may stop the assessment at any time, she said. So may I. So may Meredith. Gideon maintains physical control of Atlas unless we agree otherwise. Jonah picked up the pen. His signature was hard and narrow. The occupational therapy room had been prepared with more care than drama. A section of non-slip flooring covered the center. Extra equipment had been removed. One adjustable table remained against the wall. The door to the corridor stayed partly open, so Atlas would not feel enclosed. Meredith appeared on a tablet mounted near the corner, wearing headphones and holding Atlas's medical file. Mara positioned Jonah near the windows, but left enough space around the chair for the dog to circle. A forest green blanket lay across Jonah's legs. You do not have to touch him, Mara said. Jonah looked at her. I know. You do not have to perform being unaffected either. His eyes narrowed. I know that too. Gideon brought Atlas to the doorway. The German shepherd stopped before crossing the threshold. His left ear stood high, the folded tip of the right angled backward. His honey-gold chest rose once, slowly. He looked first at the floor, then at Mara, then at the tablet carrying Meredith's face. Finally, he saw Jonah. Atlas did not pull. He did not bark. His body became still in a way Gideon had learned meant attention gathering around a single point. Jonah's right hand tightened against the push rim. Gideon kept the lead loose. "Take your time," he said. Atlas stepped into the room. The wheelchair drew his attention immediately. He approached from the side, lowered his muzzle, and sniffed the front caster, the metal footrest, and the edge of the blanket. Jonah did not speak. Atlas moved around the chair, studying each new element. He paused behind Jonah, where the red clicker cord hung from the pouch, but did not touch it. Then he came back to the front. Jonah's breathing had changed. Not dramatically, a shallower inhale, a pause before release. Atlas lifted his head. Recognition did not arrive through a name, it arrived through rhythm. Jonah saw it happen. His face changed before his body did. "No," he whispered. Atlas took one step closer. Jonah's hand rose involuntarily, palm low, fingers angled inward, the old signal for slow. Atlas obeyed. Not with the sharpened precision of a working dog awaiting a command, but with the careful adjustment of an old animal recognizing a familiar language. He advanced one step at a time. Jonah kept his hand suspended. Atlas sniffed the knuckles. His silvered muzzle moved along the wrist, then toward Jonah's sleeve. The dog circled the front wheel once more, as if checking whether the machine belonged to the man or had replaced him. No one interrupted. Atlas stopped in front of Jonah. The distance between them was less than a foot. Jonah could have reached him. He did not. Gideon understood the fear in the refusal. A single touch might become a promise might become obligation. Obligation might expose every limit Jonah had spent months learning to name. Atlas made the choice for him. The dog lowered his head and rested it across Jonah's covered thigh. His weight was gentle, but complete. Jonah's breath left him. Atlas did not look toward the door. He did not reposition himself between Jonah and Mara. He did not stand guard. He closed his eyes. A long sigh moved through his body, deep enough to lower his shoulders. Jonah stared down at him. "He should be watching the room," he said. Meredith's voice came softly from the tablet. "He is resting." Jonah's hand hovered above the dog's ear. "He never rested first." "Maybe he was waiting to know whether he could," Mara said. Jonah's fingers lowered. They touched the silvered fur behind Atlas's left ear. Atlas did not rise. Jonah's hand remained there, not gripping, not stroking repeatedly, just contact. The moment lasted without becoming a spectacle. No one cried out, no music arrived. No one declared that love had overcome disability. Jonah sat in a wheelchair. Atlas lay against him. Both facts remained true. After several minutes, Mara asked Jonah to shift his chair slightly. Jonah moved one wheel backward. Atlas lifted his head, stepped aside, and allowed the motion without blocking. They tested a second movement, then a third. Atlas tracked the chair but did not attempt to control it. Meredith noted the behavior. "He is attentive," she said, "not currently hypervigilant." Jonah looked at Gideon. "Currently." "Yes," Gideon said. The honesty mattered more than reassurance. The assessment continued for 20 minutes. Atlas responded to Jonah's low hand signals, accepted Gideon stepping between them, and remained calm when Mara opened and closed the corridor door. When Jonah flexed his hands after a muscle spasm, Atlas noticed but did not stand over him. At the end, Gideon clipped the lead shorter. Atlas rose without resistance. Jonah looked at the consent form still lying on the side table. "I cannot care for him alone," he said. Gideon nodded. "That is the first completely honest thing you have said to me." Jonah's eyes hardened, but only briefly. "I told you that before." "No, before you said you should not have him. That is different."
Mara moved closer. "The approved foster home can take Atlas today," she said. "It is 65 minutes from here. Quiet property, one primary caregiver, experience with retired working dogs." Jonah looked down at his legs. "And then?" "Then we build information instead of forcing a conclusion," Mara replied. "Supervised visits, functional handling assessments, home planning, equipment trials. We determine what Atlas needs, what you can do, what support is available, and whether living together is appropriate." "No promises." "No promises." Jonah looked at Atlas. The dog stood beside Gideon now, calm but attentive. "How often?" "Initially twice a week," Mara said. "More only if the transitions are stable." Jonah's hand rested on the push rim. "What if he starts guarding?" "We address it."
What if I cannot manage the care? Then we say so, without turning that answer into a judgment about your worth. Jonah looked at her. Mara held his gaze. For once, he had no argument ready. "All right," he said. The word was quiet. It was enough. Gideon led Atlas toward the door. The dog looked back. Jonah raised his right hand, 2 fingers angled downward. End of shift. Atlas stopped. The old signal had once meant the day was over, the search was complete, and separation would follow. This time, Jonah added something he had not said during the assessment. "Go with him." Atlas watched him for another second. Then the shepherd turned and walked beside Gideon into the corridor. He did not pull back. He did not plant his feet. At the van, Atlas climbed the ramp after one glance toward the building. Gideon secured the compartment and checked the monitor. Jonah had followed to the therapy entrance. Mara stood behind the chair but did not push it. The winter sun lit the white hair at Jonah's forehead. One hand remained raised beside his chest. Gideon entered the driver's seat. On the monitor, Atlas turned once and lay down. Not at the door, in the center of the bedding. Gideon started the engine. The foster address waited in his notebook. The legal transfer remained temporary. Nothing had been solved in a single morning. Jonah was still learning how to live in a changed body. Atlas was still an aging dog with habits shaped by years of work. They were not going home together. Not yet. But the silence between them no longer had permission to decide the ending. By the time North Star officially closed, winter had begun to change its voice. The snow still lay deep across northern Wisconsin and Minnesota, but the days had grown longer. Sunlight remained on the roads past 5 o'clock, turning the packed banks beside the highway from blue to gold before dusk. Icicles formed along porch roofs in the afternoon and hardened again overnight. North Star's kennel building stood empty near Ironwood. The sign remained beside the road, but the white compass star had been removed from the office door. The remaining files, medication records, transfer agreements, and behavioral histories had been moved to the Great Lakes Retired Canine Coalition, a small network that already handled foster placements across 3 states. The building had closed. The work had not. Gideon learned that difference through email. Before the North Star route, he considered a transfer complete once the receiving signature was dry. The dog's compartment had been cleaned, and the final mileage entered into his blue notebook. What happened after that belonged to veterinarians, handlers, families, and organizations with offices. Now reports arrived every Friday. Morrow had begun sleeping beneath Wesley's kitchen table instead of beside the barn cabinet. The rebuilt ramp held through 2 freezing rains. Harold Vick had taken him to a veterinary appointment when Wesley's truck failed to start. Nix had spent 10 days separated from April's older shepherd mix before the first controlled introduction. Dana did not visit during that period. When a behavioral consultant finally approved a short meeting, Dana stayed outside the fence until Nix chose to approach. Sable lived in Owen's apartment at night and spent her afternoons near the entrance of the Veterans Center. Mavis remained responsible for medical decisions. Visitors had stopped trying to call Sable from across the room. They had learned to let the old dog decide where attention belonged. Bracken had gained 3 pounds under Edwin's care. Corinne's formal correction had been added to his permanent record. The newspaper published a short clarification that did not receive nearly as much attention as the original story. Some errors left louder footprints than their corrections.
Gideon saved that sentence in his notebook, but did not write where it came from. Atlas's reports were longer. For the first 2 weeks, he stayed with Ruth Calder, a 61-year-old foster caregiver who lived on a quiet property outside Two Harbors. Ruth had handled retired working dogs for more than a decade. Her home had wide doorways, rubber runners, a fenced exercise area, and no other animals. She did not treat Atlas as fragile. She also did not confuse endurance with wellness. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, she drove him to Clearwater Ridge. Jonah never missed a session. Mara built the work slowly enough to frustrate both men. The first week contained no leash handling at all. Jonah learned Atlas's feeding schedule, medication routine, signs of fatigue, and the difference between the dog watching him and the dog monitoring the room. During the second week, Jonah practiced moving his wheelchair beside Atlas while Mara held the lead. The third week introduced a waist-mounted leash system that attached to a stable belt rather than relying entirely on grip strength. Jonah disliked it immediately. "It makes me look like I am towing equipment," he said. Mara measured the distance between the belt and Atlas's harness. "You are not being evaluated for elegance." "I should have read the program description more carefully." Atlas stood beside him, unconcerned. Mara adjusted the attachment point. "Turn left." Jonah pushed one wheel forward and the other back. Atlas moved with the chair, not ahead, not behind, beside. The first attempt ended when Jonah turned too sharply and the leash touched the wheel. The second ended when Atlas stopped to inspect a rubber doorstop. The third worked. Jonah completed a full circuit of the therapy room without wrapping the leash, blocking Atlas's movement, or asking Mara to intervene. He did not celebrate. He wrote down what had gone wrong. That was how Mara knew he had begun to believe the arrangement might matter. Other skills proved harder. Atlas could use a low ramp to enter Ruth's vehicle, but Jonah had to learn where to position his chair without trapping the dog between the ramp and the wheel. Medication containers needed lids Jonah could open reliably on days when his hands spasmed. Food storage had to remain reachable but secure. The most difficult lesson had nothing to do with equipment. "Call for help," Mara said. Jonah looked at the phone on the practice counter. "I know how phones work." "Then demonstrate." "This is absurd. You are alone." "Atlas slips on ice and cannot stand. What do you do?" "Assess his legs. Then, use the support harness." "If you cannot lift him?" Jonah's jaw tightened. "I try again." Mara waited. Atlas lay on the mat nearby, his silvered muzzle resting between his paws. Jonah looked at the dog, then at the phone. He selected Ruth's number from the emergency contact list and pressed call. Ruth answered on the second ring. "This is a drill," Jonah said. "I assume so. You sound offended." "Mara wants proof I can request assistance." "Terrible woman." Mara folded her arms. Ruth continued. "What happened?" "Atlas is down outside and I cannot safely move him. I am on my way. Keep him warm. Do not drag him." Jonah entered the call. "There," he said. "Civilization preserved." Mara took the phone. "Again tomorrow." Jonah complained, but he returned. A month after the first meeting, the coalition located a small, accessible house less than 2 miles from Clearwater Ridge. It belonged to a housing program for former service members leaving long-term rehabilitation. The house was not ready. The front approach had an uneven section where melted snow froze each night. 2 interior doors had round knobs Jonah struggled to turn. The bedroom entrance was too narrow for his chair and Atlas to pass comfortably side by side. The back step required a longer ramp, and the kitchen had no safe place for a large water bowl. No single donor arrived to solve everything. Instead, help came in pieces. Wesley mailed a hand-drawn ramp plan based on the one Gideon had corrected at the orchard. The measurements were precise, though a note at the bottom admitted the first version had been built with optimism instead of geometry. Dana connected Mara with a retired canine instructor who had trained dogs around mobility devices. Mavis sent information about a regional veteran housing grant. Corinne paid the first 6 months of Atlas's arthritis medication directly to the veterinary clinic, with no request for her name to appear on any document. Owen donated 2 heavy rubber mats from the station's storage room. Tessa sent a mustard-colored blanket that Atlas ignored for 3 days before claiming it completely. No one called the arrangement a family. No one needed to. The work collected around Jonah and Atlas until neither of them had to carry all of it alone. Their first overnight trial took place on a Thursday. Atlas was approved to stay from late afternoon until the following morning. Ruth would remain on call. A support worker named Clara Bennett, an experienced home care aide in her 50s, would arrive at 7 to assist with the morning routine and evaluate any difficulties. Mara checked the house one last time before leaving. Food? Measured. Medication? 6 p.m. Backup number? Beside the phone, in the phone, and apparently carved into my soul.
Exterior path? Sand, not salt.
Emergency plan? Jonah looked at her. Call for help before pride becomes a medical event. Mara nodded. You have learned something. Against my will. Atlas slept through most of the inspection. When the front door finally closed, Jonah and the dog were alone. For the first hour, nothing happened. Jonah prepared food at the lowered kitchen counter. Atlas ate, drank, and followed him into the living room. They watched snow gather along the windows while an old documentary played without either of them paying attention. At 10:30, Jonah went to the bedroom. Atlas followed. His bed had been placed against the inside wall, away from the door, where he could see Jonah without controlling the entrance. He sniffed it. Then he walked to the doorway and stood across it. Jonah waited. Atlas did not lie down. Your bed is over there. The dog looked at him. Jonah used the visual place signal. Atlas stepped toward the bed, circled once, then returned to the doorway. Jonah felt irritation rise before concern could disguise itself. Atlas. The dog remained standing. The posture was familiar from years earlier. Shoulders level, head low enough to conserve energy, attention divided between Jonah and the hall. On duty. Jonah could have ordered him down repeatedly. He could have closed the door or used the old clicker signal. Instead, he called Mara. She answered in a voice that suggested she had expected the call. He is at the door. What is the rest of his body doing? Standing. Tail? Neutral. Breathing? Normal. Watching you or the hall? Both. Mara paused. Move the bed. It is already in the location we planned. The plan was based on what we thought he needed. He is telling us something else. Jonah looked at the dog bed against the wall. Where? Halfway between you and the door, but not blocking your path. That rewards the behavior. It gives him a place to rest while we reshape it. Jonah disliked the answer because it replaced victory with process. He repositioned the bed. Atlas sniffed it and lay down. His head remained raised. Jonah lowered the bedroom light and returned to his own bed. 20 minutes later, Atlas was still awake. Jonah did not command him again. Nothing is happening, he said into the dark. There is no search, no call, no one is missing. Atlas's ear shifted. You do not have to stay awake because I am here. The words sounded wrong as soon as he spoke them. Too close to what Jonah had believed before, that Atlas should stay away because Jonah had changed. He tried again. I am going to sleep. You are allowed to do the same. Atlas lowered his muzzle, not fully, enough. Sometime after midnight, Jonah woke to silence. The doorway was clear. Atlas remained on the bed, asleep on his side, paws relaxed. Jonah watched his chest rise and fall. He did not call Mara. He did not mark the moment as success, he simply closed his eyes again. The overnight visits increased gradually. One night became 2, 2 became 3, never consecutive at first. Clara handled morning support. Ruth remained the primary foster caregiver on other days. Jonah practiced loading Atlas into an accessible vehicle, managing veterinary appointments, and adjusting the exercise plan when cold weather stiffened the dog's hips. Not every trial improved. During one visit, Jonah experienced a severe muscle spasm in the kitchen. Atlas stood and moved between the wheelchair and the hallway. Jonah used the release signal, but the dog remained alert for nearly an hour afterward. The next week, Mara reduced the visit length. Jonah did not argue. That restraint mattered more than passing every assessment. By late March, the formal review allowed Atlas to stay with Jonah 3 nights each week, with support in place and Ruth retaining foster responsibility during the transition. It was not yet permanent adoption. For once, neither man demanded that the future arrive faster than it could be made safe. Gideon returned to Clearwater Ridge on a bright morning after fresh snow. He had not been assigned a delivery nearby. He had not received a transfer order or a request for documentation. He came because Jonah had sent a message containing only an address and the words, "Coffee at 10, bring the empty truck." The adapted house stood beneath tall pines, its new ramp clean against the snow. A wide overhang protected the front entrance. Through the window, Gideon saw Jonah at a table covered with printed reports. Atlas lay beside the wheelchair. Gideon knocked once. Jonah opened the door using the lowered handle. "You are 2 minutes early." "That is on time." "I have heard that somewhere." Inside, the house looked occupied rather than staged. A water bowl sat on a rubber mat near the kitchen. Medication containers filled one accessible drawer. The mustard blanket from Tessa had been pulled halfway off Atlas's bed. Atlas rose when Gideon entered. The shepherd approached, smelled Gideon's coat and hands, then looked toward the front door. Gideon expected him to stand between them. Instead, Atlas returned to Jonah and lay down, resting his head across the man's covered foot. "He does that now," Jonah said. "I noticed. Do not make it sentimental." "I was not planning to." Jonah gestured toward the papers on the table. The Great Lakes Coalition had asked him to review transition cases involving retired canines whose former handlers were unavailable, medically limited, or reluctant to reestablish contact. "I told them I am not a counselor," Jonah said. "What did they say?" "That most of their handlers do not want a counselor. They want someone who understands why refusing can feel responsible." "And do you?" Jonah looked down at Atlas. "Yes." The answer carried no pride, only recognition.
Gideon accepted a mug of coffee and sat near the window. Jonah nodded toward the van outside. "What is next?" "Montana." "That is not next. That is a state. A facility outside Helena has 3 retiring canines and an incomplete transition plan." "They called you?" "The coalition asked me to review the route." Jonah's eyebrow lifted. "You are moving into administration." "No." "Consulting?" "Possibly." "That sounds worse." Gideon drank the coffee. It was stronger than necessary. "I agreed on one condition." Jonah waited. "Follow-up after placement. 30 days minimum. No file closes at the first signature." "You are making your job harder." Gideon looked toward Atlas. "Maybe I was only doing the easiest part before." Jonah sat back in the wheelchair. For a moment, neither man spoke. Their silence no longer functioned as retreat. It had become room. Outside, light snow began falling from a clear patch of sky, thin flakes turning in the sunlight.
Gideon stood to leave before the roads changed. Jonah rolled toward the entryway. Atlas followed. The 3 of them went onto the covered porch. The ramp descended toward Gideon's dark green van, its 5 rear compartments empty. Atlas looked at the vehicle. He did not move toward it. Gideon opened the driver's door and saw the silver whistle in the storage tray beneath the dashboard. He had carried it through every stop since Bayfield. For weeks it had remained in his coat, then on the dash, always within reach and never used. He placed it inside the glove compartment. Jonah watched. "Still collecting other people's history?" "Only the parts they give me." Atlas stood beside the wheelchair, his dark saddle broken by the honey gold patch near his shoulder. The fold at the tip of his right ear caught a small line of snow. Gideon put one hand on the open van door. He could have called the dog's name. He could have tested whether Atlas would come. The thought passed through him and left without becoming action. Jonah rested his hand behind Atlas's silvered ear. The dog leaned lightly into the touch. Then Atlas turned his head toward the house. No command had been given. No old signal told him the shift was over. No leash held him in place. No duty required him to stay beside Jonah or follow Gideon back to the road. The choice belonged to him. Gideon climbed into the van. Through the windshield, he saw Jonah and Atlas remain together on the porch, not as a man proving he could manage alone, and not as a dog returning to permanent service. Behind them stood a house altered by many hands, a ramp Wesley helped design, equipment selected by Mara, a care plan built by Meredith and Ruth, funding information sent by Mavis, medical support partly paid by Corinne, mourning assistance accepted by Jonah. None of those contributions weakened the bond between the man and the dog. They made room for it to exist without consuming either of them.
Gideon started the engine. Atlas lifted his head at the sound, watched the van for a moment, and then settled beside Jonah's wheel. The road ahead would carry Gideon west toward another incomplete plan. He would still check locks twice. He would still record mileage, medication, weather, and every signature. He would still prefer practical work to explanations. But he no longer believed a transfer ended when a compartment became empty. Home was not the place where one person proved strong enough to carry everything. It was the place where responsibility could be divided without dividing love. Atlas had not returned to Jonah to resume an assignment. Jonah had not accepted Atlas to prove his body still had value. They had chosen a new relationship, one that required help, limits, patience, and more than one pair of hands. The van moved down the snow-lined road. In the mirror, the house remained visible between the pines for several seconds. Jonah raised one hand. Atlas stayed where he was, and no one asked him to do otherwise.
Sometimes healing does not arrive as strength returning all at once. It comes when we finally allow another hand to carry part of what has become too heavy. Jonah and Atlas did not find their way back by pretending nothing had changed. They found it by accepting limits, sharing responsibility, and choosing each other again in a new form. In our own lives, grace may look just as ordinary. A door held open, a burden divided, or someone who stays without needing us to prove we can manage alone. If this story stayed with you, share the moment that meant the most in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, courage, and second chances. May you be given the humility to receive help, the strength to offer it, and the peace of knowing that love does not become weaker when it is carried by more than one pair of hands.